There are very few countries on earth that do not have some form of a violence problem. You might be shocked to hear that South Africa is not one of these countries. As is the case with most countries, South Africa has a history of wars and conflict. It also has, by the way, a very important history of respect and cooperation between communities. It is part of history that we don't often talk about, mostly because it doesn't fit the narrative. But talking about narrative, the story of South Africa used to be that South Africa was a violent country with a vicious government up until 1994, when South Africa became free. After that, the problems we experienced were just minor hiccups, as South Africa was getting out of its so-called democratic starting blocks. Well, today there are very few people left who still believe that narrative. Reality has disillusioned us. It is only a declining number of academics and political commentators who are still trying to sell us that story about the South African miracle. In today's episode of Fact Sheet, I want to talk about violent crime in South Africa. Not South Africa's brutal history before we were saved by the ANC, but the brutal story of violent crime in South Africa under the ANC government. Although politically incorrect, a discussion about violent crime in South Africa would be incomplete if we don't provide some context by pointing to the ANC's campaign of violence during the 1980s. It is no secret that the ANC describes itself as a Marxist-Leninist movement and that it was supported by the Soviet Union during the Cold War. The Soviet Union had its own objective: to build a global alliance of communist movements. The ANC's objective was to gain control of the levers of power in South Africa in order to further the goals of its so-called National Democratic Revolution, which is basically a fluffy way of saying that the ANC wants to promote communism in South Africa. By the 1970s, however, and particularly after the Soweto uprisings of 1976, the Soviet Union became concerned that it had backed the wrong horse. This is because the ANC was virtually irrelevant, with movements like Inkatha of Mangosuthu Buthelezi and the Black Consciousness movement of Steve Biko taking the lead as far as the plight of black communities in South Africa were concerned. On the insistence of the Soviet Union, the ANC was then sent on a study tour to Vietnam, where they learned about the People's War strategy of Ho Chi Minh and Vo Nguyen Giap. This strategy was mostly invented by Mao Zedong of the Communist Party of China, another long-standing ally of the ANC. At its core, it's a strategy of promoting violence and unrest in a way to make the country ungovernable in order to gain political power in the midst of the chaos. It's called a people's war because it regards people as expendable. In fact, if your own people are killed as a result of the violence, it provides good propaganda opportunity to portray yourself as the victim. Even more so if the victims are children. Without going into more detail, the point is that the ANC had an active campaign of encouraging a culture of violence in South Africa during the 1980s. It is a culture of violence that was deliberately created and under which we still suffer. This is exacerbated by rising expectations among the poor and the spectacular failing of the South African government in even its most basic functions. Fast forward to 2021, in the first 3 months of 2021, about 5,000 people were murdered in South Africa. In the 3 months time frame, the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal provinces recorded double-digit murder increases of 21.5% and 16.9% respectively, compared to the previous year. With more than 20,000 murders per year, that amounts to around 35 murders per 100,000 people. The global average is around 6 per 100,000. We often hear calculations based on the past year's crime stats, but if we were to spread these numbers out over a longer time frame, the numbers become even more shocking. But we can also add up the statistics over the past 26 years since the ANC came to power, promising a free and prosperous future for all who live in South Africa. This is based on the South African Police Service official crime stats as published from 1994 up until March 2020. Over the 26-year time frame, more than 500,000 people have been murdered in South Africa. 527,534 to be precise. That's 60 murders per day. For our American friends, think of it this way. Under the ANC, more people have been murdered in South Africa than the total amount of American soldiers killed in World Wars I and II combined. Over the same time frame, there were 1,479,143 reported sexual offences. That's 169 sexual offences per day. And of course, not counting those that were never reported. There were 5,574,649 serious assaults, which amounts to 636 per day. Residential burglaries, 6,707,282. That's 766 residential burglaries per day, not counting non-residential burglaries. Theft of motor vehicles and motorcycles, 2,021,397. That's 231 cases per day. Drug-related crimes, 3,448,776. That's 394 per day. Malicious damage to property, 3,371,121. That's 385 incidents per day. Kidnapping, 134,747 cases. Think about that. It's 15 cases of kidnapping per day in one country. The list goes on. South Africa is sick, and the problem is not merely violent crime. We haven't even touched on the topics of corruption, failure of government, disastrous policies, government dependency, and the approaching fiscal cliff. Violent crime, like the other issues as well, is the symptom, not the problem. There are deeper underlying issues that would more accurately describe the underlying sickness that South Africa is suffering from. But perhaps that is a topic for a different day. But I'd like to hear from you on this. If we were to accept that violent crime is a symptom of the problem and not the problem itself, how would you define the problem? Please let me know in the comments section. I'm eager to read your comments and to possibly do a future video on this. Lastly, on a strangely optimistic note, what we have also learned here in the southern tip of Africa is that we cannot be dependent on government, nor can we wait for government to solve our problems on our behalf. That includes even keeping people safe. There is a bigger discussion to be had about the fact that we keep paying taxes to fund a government that isn't even able to fulfill its most basic functions. But on the other hand, we have learned that well-organized communities who take control of their safety, who are vigilant, who establish communication lines, who organize community safety structures, who drive patrols, who communicate with their neighbors and their neighboring towns, and who work with the police as far as possible, are able to keep themselves safe. We have serious problems in this country, but we are learning the lessons that the rest of the world is yet to learn. This is why we intend to stay here and how we intend to build a future where we will be safe, free and prosperous. My name is Adam Strutz and this is your Fact Sheet.